ACMP's August member webinar, The NeuroScience of Cultural Change. Before I introduce our speaker today, first of all, my name is Lynn Wheeling. I'm the Executive Director for ACMP, and I want to welcome each and every one of you to this webinar. It's going to be very interesting. But before I introduce the speaker, I would hope that you would indulge me in allowing me to mention a few things that I think are important for our members. First, the Change Management 2014 call for speakers is open. We invite you to visit the ACMP website to view the session topics and tracks. And if you would like to be considered as a speaker for one of the world's largest gatherings of change management professionals, we invite you to submit a presentation. Secondly, ACMP is committed to the profession of change management. As I'm sure you're all aware, especially if you've watched Donna Brighton, ACMP's president's video on our website, there are three key elements to a profession: a standard and a credential against that standard, a code of ethics and professional conduct, and a membership organization to oversee and adjudicate on behalf of the profession. As the ACMP continues to embark on establishing the profession, we are looking to establish a task force for the first code of ethics for the profession of change management. If you are interested in participating in this incredible endeavor, we would invite you to submit an application on the ACMP volunteer site. You can find the link to the application right off of the main page. We have until August 30th to complete those applications. Okay, with that said, we'll get right on to our great speaker today. It is my honor to introduce our speaker, Josh Davis, PhD and Director of Research and a Professor for the Neuro Leadership Institute. Josh received his bachelor's from Brown University and his PhD from Columbia University. His career began in engineering, from which he transitioned to academic teaching and research about the mind and brain. His research deals with adaptive emotional state control and mind-body connections. He has received funding from the National Science Foundation, and he has taught at New York University, Columbia University, and Barnard College. He is a member of Barnard College Department of Psychology, and it is our distinct honor to have him with us today. Josh?
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. So it's great to be with you, and it's great also to, sorry, I just paused for a moment as the screen was shifting over to my screen. It's great to be with you, and it's really nice to be talking about this topic of cultural change. It's a topic that for many people in change management is sort of the big one, the big issue. How do we change the whole culture of an organization? And it's certainly one that I've enjoyed thinking about. I would say that we're at a place where there are some answers that we can start to put together from neuroscience, but we're starting. And so there are clearly many directions we can take this and build on it. So today what I'll be showing you is both an approach to cultural change and also exploding what some of these ideas can be when we say, even what we're talking about when we're talking about cultural change, that it's a term itself that in order to make some headway on it, we need to have a little bit clearer idea of what we're even referring to. My objectives for you, my hope for you by the end of our hour together is that you'll have some ideas about how to build new organizational cultures of different kinds according to neuroscience principles. So what some of the principles are that would lead to that, to the ways you would implement. And then also how to make the new culture stick. Because it's one thing to say, well, this is what we need to change to, this is the new model, but how do you make it stick? How do you make it actually become part of the enduring and ongoing culture? And that's a piece that there really is some information that's relevant to that, and it's something that in my experience often gets overlooked. So what do leaders want when they say they want to change their culture? And this can mean many things. I would suggest to you, these are some of the ones that I've come across. These seem to be the big ones that we've come across at the Institute. People say they want to create a culture of development. They want to be developing their people, encouraging their people to work at their best, to perform at their best. A culture of innovation, often a big part of technology companies. We need the next best thing. Every year we have to be creative. A culture of accountability. So when the issues are that you really need to be able to build communication and trust between different parts of an organization, often an issue in large organizations. Culture of caring for the customer. And this is not what every organization is about, but for some, this is what it's really about. So these are, you won't find these across every organization, but in a place like in a Starbucks or in a, an organization like even an insurance company, it has a lot to do with personal interactions on the phone. It can be important shifts. A culture of cost cutting. We can't always be growing, and sometimes the smarter business move is to cut costs. And so what kind of mindset is useful for that? What is a good place to have people? And then ultimately a culture of change. So a culture in which adaptability is the norm, a culture in which people are encouraging one another to explore how to change the culture. And that is not what every organization wants, but it is, I would say, becoming the new paradigm. Is something that comes up again and again. And so now, I guess I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, we'll bring up a little bit of a poll. I'm curious to see, of these, which ones are the challenges that you're encountering in terms of changing the culture of an organization. And you'll have a chance to answer on that poll. And also, I would invite you to think about, are there others that you encounter in your work that don't fit in here? One of the things we're always doing at the Neuro Leadership Institute is continuing to connect with business leaders and scientists and bring the two together and finding those synergies. And so I view every interaction as an opportunity to learn more. Is it possible to, Annette, to bring up the first poll now? And I don't know if you have that on your screen yet.
Hi Josh, it's Annette. I launched the first poll. Have you ever been to a fantastic lecture?
That is for a different talk. Could we launch the poll for the slide that asking which of these types of cultural development, which of these types of culture that they're interested in developing? Do you have one for that?
I don't have one for that. I apologize.
Okay. No matter. Is there, and what I'll do is I'll open up the chat box and invite people to type in whether there are other types of cultures that they're interested in developing. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. And the attendees can feel free to type that into the chat box, and I'm happy to share their responses.
Great, great. Okay. And shall I say that again, or were they able to hear that already?
Nope, they can hear that.
Great.
So right now, Josh, some of your responses are culture of innovation. We have one for culture of relationships. culture of growth, and then we have one that says we want to change the culture in all those points except the first one because they're already there with that one.
Okay, fantastic. Excellent. And so culture of relationship or culture of relation is one that it'll be interesting to see if there are pieces here that are relevant to that or whether that would be its own. So that's a new one for me, so I appreciate that. Okay, great, thank you. So the way this will work today is I'm going to dive into the first one as a way of illustrating the concept, giving you a little bit more detail on building a culture of development. This will be as an example. There isn't time in an hour to go through thoroughly each one of these, but there is time to communicate something valuable, I believe, that you can actually use, you can actually take away and use. I'm going to go in more deeply on the first one, building a culture of development as an example, and then take some time to talk about how to make a culture stick, and then a briefer overview of some principles that are relevant to building each of the other types of cultures. So for a culture of development, there's two pieces actually to think about. One is to avoid shutting down learning, and the other is to activate a person's capacity to learn, to get the brain into a state where they're both avoiding shutting down their capacity for learning and activating it. And those are not just two sides of the same coin. They're two separate things to be doing. But just to get us started then with this, want to just see where people are starting from. And now if we were doing this live, I would ask for a show of hands, but instead we can do sort of yes, no kind of thing. So first of all, those people who would say that leaders are born, and I know in this audience of change management professionals, people are interested in seeing how they can help develop people often. Nonetheless, I'll ask you to be honest with yourself. Is there some way in which you kind of believe, yeah, there's talent. Talent is out there, and my job is to find it. People do seem to have some innate differences in talent. So in that way, I'll be asking for a virtual show of hands for who would say they tend to lean more towards leaders are born. The talent is out there, and there's some people who are good and some people who aren't so good. Annette, could we have the next poll there, the poll for leaders are born, yes, no?
Josh, can you see the results there? We have 37% saying yes, leaders are born, and 63% saying no.
Okay, great. And then for the other side then, there's this idea, okay, leaders are made, and so is it safe to say then that the rest of you would say, okay, no, I could take anyone and I could build them up. I could make them great. Give me anyone, I could work with them and take them and develop them. And so if you would say yes to that, then let's go ahead with the leaders are made side and say, get some yes, no on that.
All right, and our leaders are made. We have 85% saying yes and 15% saying no.
All right, great. Okay, so this concept, this distinction, this idea that you could actually take anyone and develop them. Now, I'm not going to say which is right. I don't know that we could ever say which is right. Is it possible to take anyone and develop them? Or are there real important differences in the mental abilities people are born with? But what we do know from research is that if you believe that leaders are made, you're going to make much better ones. And that has been shown time and again throughout the literature for the last 50 years. So this is a summary of work. Carol Dweck has been probably the person driving this the most. of research on something called mindset. Some of you may be familiar with her book, in fact, by that title. You can talk about a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And the idea is this, that there may be a particular ability, say intelligence or funniness or empathy or whatever it is, an ability that a person has. And it is possible people tend to fall into one of two categories, either that this is a fixed trait, this is something we're born with, or it's something that we can develop. You can learn to be more intelligent. You can learn to be more empathic. You can learn to be funnier. Well, some interesting things happen when you have that belief about a particular trait. If you have a fixed mindset about a particular trait, this is what tends to happen. When presented with a challenge, a person with a fixed mindset is likely to avoid that challenge because a challenge represents an opportunity to fall, an opportunity to learn that they don't have as good skills as they thought they did. Whereas a person with a growth mindset tends to embrace that challenge because it's an opportunity to learn something new. A person with a fixed mindset, when persistence is necessary, when it's the kind of thing that's just hard work and it's not very pleasant, you need to just stick with it. A person with a fixed mindset tends to give up. And this is because if they were persisting, what would that mean about them? A person with a growth mindset tends to persist because they're looking at whatever that particular quality is as something that is based on how much effort and persistence they put into it. The value of effort then, some of us on the call, often people who do get to high levels of success will have had this experience at some point, but there's some things they're very good at naturally and some things that take work. And there can be times in our lives when we'll sort of say, well, if I'm putting in effort, then that would mean that I'm not very good at it, that I'm not naturally good at it. So effort is kind of seen as fruitless. What would be the point in effort if it's based on an innate talent? Whereas for a growth mindset, it's exactly the opposite. Effort is the path to mastery. And probably each of us on the call has had that experience at times for some other quality where we didn't view it that way, where we didn't view it as fixed, where putting in the effort was what we wanted to do. We enjoyed the process of mastery. Result of feedback. So this is one which is insidious within performance management. Getting and giving feedback seems so important. Well, if you have a belief that what you're getting feedback about is something that can't change, it tends to just shut people down, tends to sort of threaten their status and shut them down. Whereas if you're in a growth mindset, feedback is something that you can use to learn, to continue on this path to mastery. Sometimes some of you on the call may have had the experience of learning about a colleague who's doing very well, and it kind of actually made you feel worse. If you have a fixed mindset, social comparison, learning about someone else who's a real leader in some particular way or very successful, can be threatening because it just means that you don't have as many opportunities as they do. It says something about your qualities. Whereas with a growth mindset, that person becomes a model. How can I learn to do what they're doing? And what motivates a person with a fixed mindset? Praise and approval. Praise in particular about talent. You're a good person. You're very intelligent. That sort of praise. Approval from a person about who you are. Very motivating within a fixed mindset. And you can imagine there are times when that can feel great. It's anything that our brains can do. Well, this is a belief I have, but anything that our brains can do is there for a reason. There's some time at which it's useful or appropriate. However, there often are times when we overgeneralize. Motivation for a person with a growth mindset is about building mastery. This is a chance to become even better at what I do well. And the people who really enjoy the process, when we talk about enjoying the process, learning how to do it better, those are the people that over time come to really do something well. And you've probably thought about people who are good at their jobs or good at teaching or good at, let's say, being a parent. That is something that they are interested in learning about. So the growth mindset as presented this way, I recognize sounds a bit like a panacea. It is extraordinarily useful, it seems, based on the research that exists within the context of developing people within an organization. And I would say within that context, it is just certainly reasonable to think of it as a smart focus. So now I'm going to show a little bit of the research in more detail that's gone into this to give you a sense of where this comes from. What you're looking at here is a picture from the top of someone's head. The nose is up here at the front. And these would be little electrodes that have been placed on the scalp. There's something called brainwaves. You've probably heard the term brainwave at some point. Every time a neuron becomes active, there's a charged particle or a series of charged particles that flow down the axon. And when that happens, that creates a small electromagnetic wave outside the neuron. When there are enough neurons that are all firing together and they're in line and they're very close to the surface of the cortex, that electrical signal is strong enough that we can pick it up with a sensitive electrode. That's right there. So you can see those would be examples of them placed on the scalp. This gives us incredible opportunity to look at the time course of when neural activity is occurring. The spatial location's a little rough, but the time course is fantastic. This was a study in which people were given feedback. They had done a test where they're supposed to learn certain words and say, match them to a particular output, and then they get feedback. Either you made an error or you were correct. So we're breaking down the groups, and we've got two sets of people who are coming to this with a fixed mindset and people who are coming to this with a growth mindset. It's very small writing, but if you're reading, incremental is the term for growth mindset, incremental change within the literature, and entity is the term for fixed mindset, as though the particular ability is an entity as opposed to a process. So people who, what this is showing is that people who have this fixed mindset, they have an enhanced neural response to negative feedback. So in that moment when the negative feedback is coming, we're seeing an enhanced neural response. This particular wave length right here, or this particular amplitude right here is higher. It's a little hard to see on that graph, but they're an enhanced neural response right at that moment when they're getting the feedback, you did something wrong. That's what their brains are reacting to. They're showing less memory-related activity when they're getting feedback about something, or feedback that is useful for learning. So there's other parts of the brain where there's activity that's associated with embedding memories that you might use down the road. Those people with the fixed mindset are showing less of that activity, but they're showing more reactivity to the you did something wrong piece. And they're getting less of the activity that would then be relevant to actually encoding something for memory for use in the future. So it says something about the focus there. Here's another study, a very similar study that was published 5 years later, replicating the basic concepts and also showing that people with a growth mindset are not just paying greater attention to whether a mistake was made, but they are then actually using that information. So we saw in the previous study that those people didn't have the neural activity that we would typically associate with learning. In this study, we're actually finding out when you have people given a surprise retest afterwards, they actually perform more accurately. So they're not just paying attention differently to what's happening in the moment. They're then actually using that information differently too. So they perform more accurately. They've learned from the mistake. This next study is one I particularly love because I think it ties back into that original concept, leaders are born or leaders are made. This was a study in which, again, entity here that refers to fixed mindset, incremental refers to growth mindset. The squares, that would be people who were exposed to a role model. And then the diamonds here are people who were exposed to just a control, just another person. And what they've learned, what these people learned about this other person, this controller, this role model, was whether they were good at being a leader. whether it was somebody who was really succeeding at leadership. And then these people engage in a task where they need to lead another person through a game, and they are observed by impartial observers who then rate the confidence they're seeing in these people as leaders. So it's not just what they're feeling, it's actually how it's coming across. And what you see here is that people with a fixed mindset, when they're exposed to that social comparison, we see a decrease as compared to control in the leadership confidence that they portray. So it actually hurts their leadership confidence. Whereas for the people with the growth mindset, it's enhancing their leadership confidence, seeing somebody who's good at leadership. So I'm not saying that the growth mindset or the fixed mindset is more true than one another, but what I'm saying is the growth mindset is more useful when you want people to have a learning mode, a mode of development. So how can you create a growth mindset? Here are a few things that you can do in the way that goals are stated. Are we trying to be the best, or are we trying to improve and learn how to do X? In the way that feedback is delivered. And you may notice there, so sometimes when you say we want to be the best, that can be a really motivating thing to say. There's a use for different ways of phrasing things. But if you want to create that growth mindset, then you might want to shift the language. How feedback is delivered. You're really smart. You're our best. You're a 3 on our 3-point scale, or you're a 5 on our 5-point scale, is different than saying, well, these are the skills that you're working on. Here's your progress so far towards mastery. It's a very different kind of feedback. And it helps maintain and develop and encourage that growth mindset. Also, what is measured and what's acknowledged. If I say, I'm just measuring performance, then that's going to be more of a fixed mindset. Whereas if I'm saying I'm measuring effort put in, that's a growth mindset. Now, one thing I imagine that many people at this point will say as well, but we want to encourage performance. We don't want to encourage just effort if it doesn't lead to performance. We want to encourage effort, of course, but only if it leads to performance. We don't want to encourage worthless effort. It's a little bit of a paradox that if you are focusing on acknowledging simply performance, the test score, then it actually hurts performance. That the research shows that when you acknowledge effort, when you acknowledge the work that people put in, you actually end up with better performance. And I encourage you to try it. It's a robust effect. It's been done with school children. It's been done with adults. It's been done with different types of dependent measures. And then finally, just as I'm educating you right now about this, and you're educating yourself about this, and probably having insights about how it can be relevant, as you educate your workforce about mindset, and that it's a choice, and which choice they want to make, and the consequences of that, they can take that then and run with it. So I want to turn this back to you now for a moment. I encourage everyone to actually take out a pen and paper. If you're typing on a computer, just make sure that your browser windows are not open and there's no calendars open or anything, because it's very easy to get distracted. So I encourage pen and paper to take a moment and just jot down how can you encourage a growth mindset in your people and the people that you work with. Come up with a few ways if you'd like, or if there's a number of ways that are coming to mind. How can you encourage a growth mindset in your people in some way that does work for you? And when you've had a chance to answer that question, just type yes in the chat box so that we know that most people have had a chance to answer it. Annette, how are we doing? Are we starting to get some yeses that people have had a chance to answer?
We are. They're rolling in slowly. I'd give it a couple more seconds.
Yeah, it takes a little bit to think about this question. How can you encourage a growth mindset?
The majority have responded, Josh.
Wonderful. Thanks for diving into that. And if you still have some thoughts you're getting out, feel free to continue to jot those down. So now we'll turn to how do we make a new culture stick? I invite you to think back to school now, and I'm sure that you knew, if you disagree with this, type no in the chat, but that you knew what you could get away with in the classroom. And you knew about it, you knew how it was different with every teacher, you knew what certain kids could get away with and that other kids couldn't, and everybody knew it. It's a natural human ability to have to pay attention to these cues, these social cues about what the rules are. And everybody's got it, and we're especially good at doing it with social information. I'm going to tell you about two brain systems that sort of compete with one another that can sort of help explain what's going on there and how we can leverage that human capacity that I was just mentioning. So one system, and when I say system, I really mean we're talking about different brain structures. So these, and as one tends to be active, the other is often less active. So one system drives the bulk of our behavior, and that's a pattern recognizer system. Some examples of this is I might be walking down the street and see a group of kids standing somewhere, and maybe I have a little bit of fear, and there's something about the situation, I'm not sure why, and so I'll think about crossing the street, and then as I get a little bit closer, something shifts about the situation. I'm not maybe sure what it is. Who knows? Maybe I see that they're laughing, and then I say, sort of I have a different emotional reaction. This isn't so. This is fine. And I keep walking. So as I move throughout the day, constantly picking up on patterns, detecting a far greater number of inputs than I could even specify at any one point, and sort of leaning me this way or that, completing patterns based on things I've experienced in my life. And that's what's leading to most of our behaviors, to our thoughts, and to our emotions. Then we have a second system, which is evolutionarily more recent, which uses more of the prefrontal cortex, which is developed more recently, fatigues more easily. This system can step in and override the pattern recognizer, but it's that kind of a relationship that the pattern recognizer is the default. Well, so the pattern recognizer is picking up on these unwritten rules, like in the classroom, of what you can get away with. The reasoning system is picking up on the written rules. Okay, what did we say, everyone, that we're going to try to do? So to give an example that I think most people can probably resonate with, you have probably had the experience of driving, and you might have been pulled over, or at least you were worried about being pulled over for going too fast, and it can be frustrating. We can get angry at the police officer for a ticket if that ticket is above the speed limit that's posted but below the unwritten speed limit. And usually it's about 10 miles per hour above the speed limit, and sort of the evidence that the rule is so well established is that we can get upset about it. that a ticket can come for something that's less than the unwritten speed limit. So people pick up on these patterns, and these patterns come from what has actually happened in the past. They come from experience. They are not logically based. We don't lay them down by saying, I'm going to start having a different set of experiences in my life now. And so these are guiding our quick reactions to things. By contrast, then, the reasoning system, which does fatigue easily, which is metabolically more demanding, which if you've been taxing it a lot, if you've been trying to really have some conscious control over what you're doing, then it's harder to do that later in the day. It's a temporary override. This is the system that hears, hey everyone, these meetings need to start at 9, okay? But it's the pattern recognizing system that's picking up on whether those meetings actually do start at 9. And if you have a meeting that the first time you go to it and people are kind of waiting around, it doesn't really kick off until 9:05, 9:10, I guarantee you next time you'll have people showing up kind of expecting it to start at 9:05, 9:10, even if you ask them not to. And so temporarily we can override that and say, okay, no, you know what? We were asked to try to get there. I'm going to do that. I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt. But you've also kind of learned what the real rules are, or maybe not real, unwritten rules are. So taking this into example of changing culture then, so maybe I want creativity from employees. Well, without realizing it though, I might continue to appreciate quick and conservative proposals. That becomes the unwritten rule. And in fact, I might even be giving out an unwritten rule that is specifically blocking what I want. So maybe being creative is a gamble with their livelihood because I'm not responding to those proposals, and they need to have proposals accepted. So I would invite you now to take a moment, again, with your pen and paper, and allow yourself to become aware of what unwritten rules are you or your clients communicating with your behavior or their behavior. And so please take a moment and write down some thoughts that come to mind about that. And again, let us know in the chat, type yes when you've had a chance to write something down. What unwritten rules are you communicating with your behavior? Or what unwritten rules are your clients communicating with their behavior? And in particular, it's nice if you can see how that matches up to a written rule. Oh, and I'd like to say also, if there's anyone who's in the same room as someone else who's on the call, please feel free to talk it out. There's something nice that happens when there's that social engagement going on as well, and can trigger each other's ideas. Annette, are we starting to get a few yeses at this point?
Yes, we are. Got quite a few yeses right now, Josh.
Great. Excellent. So again, thanks for diving into that question. So now an overview of the neuroscience for building these cultures is where we'll take it for the rest of the time. Before diving into that, though, are there any questions at this point?
I don't have any questions right now.
Okay, great. And just let me know if people ask any, if you would. Thanks. So an overview, and this will be a quicker overview, but it's a taste with something useful from each of how you might build these different cultures. First of all, a culture of innovation. This is about creativity. This is about having those new ideas, those new breakthroughs. We all know where insights come from. They come in the shower. Well, this is actually not an accident. In fact, there are qualities of the experience of being in a shower that are important steps in the process that researchers have been able to trace out what's happening when people experience solving a problem via insight as compared to solving a similar problem in a more systematic, deliberate, analytical way where they're going through steps to get there. And this can be done with problems where it's, for example, words, matching words together and saying which word completes this pattern, like in a crossword puzzle, or it can be like numerical sequences where you could figure it out in a systematic way, but if you pick up on the rule, you can actually do it much quicker. So there are different ways of having these kinds of problems in the lab where you can have an alternative for how people could solve them. And you can see what's happening differently in the brain and in terms of people's behaviors and how quickly they react to things when they're doing that. Well, here's what's going on. Here's what seems to be key. To create the space for insight, either for yourself or to create it for someone else, first, it's necessary to expose the brain to new information and new questions. You've got to start those patterns going in the background. You've got to start connecting the pieces. And we've come across solutions that are relevant in some metaphoric way to just about everything you could imagine at this point in our lives, even at much younger ages we probably had. So exposing the brain to new information, new questions is a way to start connecting pieces from older solutions you may have seen and thoughts that are in there. But what happens, though, is that we can only have a single focus of conscious attention. And so if we are focused on the problem, then the new solution can't come to mind. It's going to be weaker signals. We're going to need to allow for quiet reflection. And one thing that happens in the shower for most people, it seems, is that they are allowing their mind to wander. They're often internally focused. They are not externally occupying their attention visually, in particular, with the problem that they're focused on. But it also has come after they've been dealing with something, because it's either the next day after they were working on some problem at work, or, you know, there's always been some thinking that preceded it, because we're always thinking. We can do that more deliberately, though. So some of the research, to give an example of the kind of research that exists on this topic, this was a study in which people had to do one of those word pairing type problems that I was describing. What you're looking at on the left here, on the y-axis, it says alpha insight effect. This is the strength of brain waves. So again, this is a brainwave study. And this is time. What we're looking at here, alpha waves are waves that when we see more of this, then we're seeing relaxation of a particular brain area. And in this case, this is brainwave data that have to do with external visual perception. So what's happening here is for a couple seconds prior to the response, when they say, I've got the answer, they're starting to have turning off their external visual perception of the outside world. That's what this is indicating. And it allows more internal focus when that's happening. So there's actually less activity in that external visual focus part of the brain. And then just at that moment, there's a certain moment here. You see suddenly there's a drop, where there's a shift. We're no longer having the alpha waves, and instead we have a different kind of brain wave taking over, gamma. Gamma waves occur. They're very high frequency waves, and when there are multiple parts of the brain that are active at the same time and are in the process of cohering into a single unit, where the different pieces of the idea are cohering together. For example, when I meet somebody, there's a voice, there's an image of them, there's a context that I might remember, there's a reason, there are emotions. All these pieces can be processed in different regions and cohere together So there's something called gamma synchrony, where we see activity across multiple brain regions at the same time in sync in this gamma frequency, and that's saying this idea is cohering together. So we see that all of a sudden where that spikes. So they've just had this visual gating of the external visual input, so they're internally focused, and then suddenly that drops and we have this burst in gamma synchrony. So external attention and conscious awareness is no longer being taken up with the problem, and at the same time, we have this new coherence that can jump into awareness because there's a lot of activity. And you may notice that the reaction is actually just a moment after that, and this may have to do with the fact that it takes a moment to get to the point where the person actually can articulate the experience of having had that insight. So there seems to be a relatively stable process. If you're guiding people through having insights, which is really what we want to do to develop a culture of innovation, there are things that you can pay attention to help create those steps. First of all, helping the person become aware of the problem. And this often doesn't need help. They're often aware of it already. And then we've got that reflection piece where we're introducing new information, we're asking questions about how they're thinking, guiding them to put pieces together in a new way, and there's quite a lot of flexibility there. That's a moment, that's a golden moment. When you see somebody's eyes go off to the side and then go quiet after you've asked a question or they've come across some information, leave them alone, because that's when innovation is happening. Following that, you're likely to have a moment of insight. The chances of insight certainly increase when you then provide the space for that quiet reflection. And then when there is an insight, use that. Rather than tabling things in the moment, there's also a burst of energy, and there's a dopamine release into reward sections of the brain. This is a moment to take that and run with it and put it into action. Now turning to a culture of accountability. This is a story about setting expectations that actually motivate people. Because when we set expectations and we fall through, that's when we're lacking accountability. And we need to meet these expectations. What do we know about setting the expectations in the right ways, and what do we know about meeting objectives? The story of expectations is this, that our brains are set up to be constantly predicting what's about to happen. It's a major function of the brain. Some people say the whole brain is a prediction machine. When we are accurately predicting what's going to happen, that's a rewarding experience for us. We have a dopamine burst. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. And we have an experience of reward. So when we're able to accurately predict something that's going to happen, there is that experience. It's very rewarding, and it really helps to continue. So what we have is the opposite when we fail to meet what we're expecting to see. So there's actually a drop in dopamine. And this could be something as simple as maybe I've said, you know, we're going to start the meeting at 9, and then we don't start it at 9. If I haven't met that, we haven't met expectations, there will probably be a little bit of a drop associated with the feeling of being a little deflated, a little bit more stress due to uncertainty. So the limbic system takes over. There's less focus as a result, decreased confidence, less likely to meet expectations in the future. So the key is, stretch goals are wonderful, but stretch expectations are terrible. Stretch goals are wonderful, but set expectations that are reasonable to actually make that will get you to that goal. You know, I will have made X number of phone calls by a certain point. Well, is that reasonable? If so, sure. Set it as an expectation. If not, you're likely to set yourself up for one of these downward spirals, which is going to then make it harder. Whereas we see just the opposite of an upward spiral when we're setting our expectations properly. So if I can say with some certainty, of course I can never predict the future, but I think it's reasonable. I could actually get 100 calls made this week for sale. Well, okay, that's a tall order, but it's reasonable for me, given what I know about myself, 20 a day. So I'm setting expectations to something that I probably can meet when I do meet them or exceed them, especially, increase in dopamine levels, I'm no longer turning on my sort of vigilance systems for what else might be wrong. I then am more likely to have the conditions to be able to just be open and think about other possibilities, perhaps more insight, and then increase confidence. And so that leads to itself. Implementation intentions are then probably my favorite piece of what we can use, what we can take advantage of. So we've set our expectations. How do we meet our objectives? This is literature that, and this holds across behaviors, thoughts, emotions. It's very broadly relevant. Once I've set a goal, something I want to achieve, I can think about the obstacles that are likely to come. We can hope the obstacles won't come, or we can think about which ones are going to come and plan for them. And that's what this is all about. So the literature shows that if I'm in a certain circumstance, let's say if I get called away on travel and I'm not able to make those sales calls, what am I going to do? I can choose an action. And then if I can plan ahead to take a certain action. And it doesn't work to say, well, if that happens, I'll just use willpower and power through it. Because willpower is the least thing, is what we have the least of in those moments. But what it does, what I can do is if I plan an alternative action, if I plan it ahead of time and then I visualize it, it's more likely to actually come to pass, substantially more likely. The culture of caring for the customer. Here, there's research that I'd like to share with you about what we know about thinking about yourself versus thinking about other people's minds. And what may not be clear at first glance here is this is meant to illustrate that these are requiring distinct neural regions. And so but that we can know, but based on looking at certain brain regions, is a person processing in the same way they would when thinking about themselves or thinking about another person. And here's why that's relevant. You can use yourself as a basis for understanding other people, but it depends on seeing them as similar. So this was a study that showed that this was at a Northeast college where most people were liberal, so conservatives were not seen as similar for most people in the study. And so what we're looking at here is a region of the brain that is can indicate for us whether we're seeing these other people that we're talking about. So mean parameter estimates means how much activity are we seeing in this region of the brain. When we're seeing other people as similar or not. So this is a part of the brain involved in processing the self and thinking about the self. And what we see is that we actually see deactivation here when people were asked to think about someone who they saw as dissimilar to themselves. So a piece here, the sort of key take-home piece here is look for ways that you are similar to your customer. And that's going to help you automatically be able to have a deeper and richer understanding of what they might be caring about and what would matter to them. Because you'll be able then to process what they're saying as though it was your own information. You're going to be much more open to their opinions and looking for the ways that they make sense. So processing in the same ways you would with your own, literally with some of the same brain structures you would for yourself. You'd be doing more of that. Let's turn to a culture of cost cutting. Well, interestingly, here's a case where actually a little bit of threat is probably helpful. So our limbic system is all about, not all about, but it's a set of brain structures that are very reactive immediately to input from the external world and then guiding us to very quickly react, getting our emotions going before we even get to the point of consciously feeling them, moving us away or towards potential threats or benefits. And one thing that happens is that when we're in a slight threat state, when we have a little bit of an away from focus, a motivation to move away, some things are highlighted that we more easily think about. So uncertainty will move us in this direction. We tend to be more problem focused We tend to be looking for what there is to avoid rather than what there is to gain. We tend to have a narrower focus. And so some anxiety can actually be useful here because the idea is we need to focus on potential threats. We need to focus on areas where we're overexposed. We need to look for the ways where we could actually cut. So there are times, again, it's an issue of what's useful. It's not an issue of certain ways of being better or worse, but it's an issue of what's useful. And it may be that a little bit of anxiety is actually more useful. And there are ways to help create a little anxiety, being problem-focused, talking about avoidance goals, helping to guide us to a narrow focus. And then finally, a culture of change. So the key pieces here are minimizing resistance to change. Now, the brain is set up to not want to change in many ways. It's sort of a funny set of opposites in the brain. People tend to love learning. I have never yet met a person who said, I don't want to master my craft. People are born loving learning. It's something that we always want to, whether it's gossip magazines or learning about intellectual things or learning how to build a bicycle or whatever it is, there's something that we tend to love learning. Not everybody loves school. Well, that's separate. So there is that, and yet at the same time, and that's change, of course, whenever we're learning, but at the same time, we have this sort of energy efficiency throughout our biology where we will use the most energy efficient way of approaching things, and that would be to do things the same way we've done them before. And so you get these funny things where we have people who want to learn how to dance and spend all day sitting on the couch. It's easier to do the things that you know how to do, even though you might enjoy the other. We have a tendency to resist change. So we want to minimize resistance to change. We want to increase neuroplasticity, the amount to which the actual neurons are growing and changing in the brain. And mindfulness is actually something that we know from research now is quite helpful with both. So mindfulness training, a broad definition, and people have varied the way that they do mindfulness training in research. So we've now seen a number of variations on it. It seems to be that there is some flexibility. It doesn't need to be a specific type. But mindfulness training, described as attainment of a perceptual shift where there's a broader awareness of thoughts and feelings, and that's without being critical of them, just noticing them and saying that is happening. Often people get there in research by doing some kind of breathing focus to help get them to a point where they're just sort of aware of what's happening without commenting on it. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is very commonly in use. MBSR associated with this. So what we're seeing here is that mindfulness-based stress reduction has been associated with increases in left hippocampal volume. The hippocampus is important for embedding new memories, so allowing us to be ready to learn more when we want to. We also see increases in gray matter in a number of brain regions that have to do with putting together new concepts, being open to new types of inputs, new ways of putting the pieces together for a problem that you may be solving. Some of these, like in the cerebellum, these are not typically associated with those kinds of changes. Those have to do with fine motor control, but these areas up here in the cingulate cortex and temporal parietal junction, these are areas for bringing disparate elements together. So, to change an organizational culture, neuroscience would suggest information about how to build the specific type of culture. And I think it's important to talk about what culture are we trying to develop, and then there's relevant information. And for each of these, then, focus on the unwritten rules to make the new culture stick. That should be a focus. Here are just a few resources if you'd like to learn more, and I'll leave this up. And I know we're at the end of the hour now, and there's been a little bit of a chance to do some back and forth or have you do some writing and thinking. But I'd like to stay on if anyone would like to. You're welcome to stay on. I can answer some questions for another few minutes. If not, it's been really great having you, and I look forward to the chance to interact. I know I often get to meet people at various conferences and meetings, and so please do come up and say hi. Look forward to having a chance to interact in person. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Josh, and thank you, everyone. As Josh said, we are at the top of the hour, but he is willing to stay and answer some questions. If you'd like to type your questions in the question pane, I'd be happy to ask them of Josh. I do want to let everyone know that the webinar will be available for playback in the Members Resource Library on our website. And with that said, Josh, thank you again, and I will go into some questions. The first one we have is, how would you identify a fixed versus growth mindset, and how do you test for it without during neuroscience research?
Okay. So the first piece of it, how would you identify it? There is actually a relatively straightforward questionnaire that you could use if you wanted to use that, and it may even be available. I don't know if Carol Dweck has made it available on her website, but it certainly could be checked, and if not, then it could be purchased. But that would be one approach. A fixed versus growth mindset. I think it's safe to assume that anyone can achieve a growth mindset. So even if you don't have a way of testing for it,
Josh, are you still with us? I apologize, everyone. It looks like we have lost Josh. So I will ask the questions that are posted in the question pane and have them posted to the resource library so that everyone who has posted a question can have it answered. Thank you all so much for attending today's webinar, and be sure to register for next month's webinar. It is open for registration on our website. It will be September 25th. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.